Dramatism Theory. Um, Dramatism Theory is basically the theory of where people don't see themselves as their real life. They see it as a scene or a scenario or somewhat of a movie. Something that Kenneth Burke said was guilt is the ultimate motive for speakers, and dramatism suggests that the Redditors are most successful when they provide their audience with a means for purging their guilt. Also, a scene requires an actor, an action, and some means for the action to take place and purpose. In other words, life itself is our own movie. I have Joaquin Phoenix's character, the Joker, here as a picture. This movie is very interesting with dramatism theory. I felt like it was all over the place. To be honest, his life was not perfect, and he started to see himself as less human and more of a role as an quote unquote actor, someone would say. And slowly, he started to realize that his whole life was just a drama scene. For my first article, it is a chapter out of a book. The chapter is consisted of Michael A. Overton. He claims that it is possible that most scientists overlooked the theory and found it either neither important or interesting. Also, that the limits of dramatism are for it to not spin out and basically relates back to reality and not a scene. Um, I see the scientists mostly overlooking this theory just because, as scientists, it doesn't really belong as an explanation for why something happens in the scenario or in the world where they're looking at it. And for as its limits, like every story, I feel like at its quote unquote point action, it starts breaking down and people start realizing that, oh, it's not a movie, it's not all about me, and they start looking at everything else around them. For Article 2, Ruckert says that dramatism is supposed to be used as a counter statement for what Burke calls a decline of realism and the rise of scientism. This really had me confused for a couple minutes because the rise of scientism doesn't really support dramatism at the same time. And so to say it's a counter statement, I think is somewhat of a stretch counter statement, I guess. Just because scientism doesn't really support dramatism, but at the same time, you're trying to compare apples to oranges, I guess. Dramatism theory isn't really made to describe human beings. It takes a lot more into consideration for all of that. And that's something that scientists don't really understand, I guess. They try to compare it to a human, but it's not the human itself that we're using the dramatism theory on. It's the scenario or action that's going on at the time. So back to the movie Joker, it's not about him himself, it's all about his actions and how he looks into seeking himself into the world with his own actions. Article 3, every scenario has its peak action point and slowly regresses back to reality. This is what I was saying, like once everybody reaches the climax, I guess, they either realize that they're super happy or super pissed off or sad or anything, and they slowly start coming down and realize like, oh, I'm still in real life. I really blew this out of proportion, and so therefore they come back to reality. The quote unquote actor and his movements vary on what feedback they're getting from the crowd. A really good example from this is again from the movie Joker. Joaquin Phoenix's character really reacts to all the feedback that he gets. When he's in the bathroom by himself, he really doesn't have any kind of feedback. So the silence is the feedback that he gets, and it just builds up his character even more because he's losing the grasp on reality that he has. But later on in the movie, when he actually has an actual crowd that gives him feedback and it's negative feedback, it keeps him even pushing towards that direction where he is going to lose it towards the end. Burke stopped looking for drama when he realized life is drama itself. In the article that I read, it really states, um, for modern performance theory, the interaction of these three constitutive elements of tragedy is crucial to understand the modern analogy life as drama. And I see it as an everyday thing. Even myself, I think about myself as the main focus, and I start thinking like, oh shoot, this is just like a movie. Like, where, how is this happening? But then slowly I start regressing and I'm like, oh, this is still real life. I'm just not thinking clearly enough. And then for my conclusion, honestly, dramatism theory is not to compare people, but their actions and what they're doing, or looking through the perspective of life, I guess. Um, it is a good theory. It takes a lot into consideration, but you have to use it in a specific way where you're not trying to control too many variables at the same time. I think about it as a book, and it just goes up and down like a roller coaster, depending on which pinpoint of the story you're in, quote unquote. But yeah, thank you for very much for listening to my theory.